New Bali, 2089. The neon lights flickered and buzzed in the night, casting eerie glows across the damp streets of New Bali. Skyscrapers loomed overhead like jagged teeth, their sleek exteriors a stark contrast to the labyrinth of crumbling factories and warehouses below. This was the city of dualities, wealth and decay, power and survival. For most, New Bali's Bandos, the sprawling ruins of a forgotten industry, were just urban wastelands. For Aether, they were a playground. 17 years old, Aether crouched in the shadows of a rusted-out factory, his hand resting lightly on the controller of his quad, a sleek, custom FPV drone. His headset glowed faintly with a soft blue light, connected to the eyes of his machine hovering silently above. He lived for this, threading his quad through tight, forgotten spaces, soaring between beams and shattered windows, dodging the debris of a broken world. Tonight, though, the thrill was tinged with something else. The package nestled in the belly of his quad wasn't heavy, but the weight of what it represented tugged at Aether's conscience. He didn't know exactly what was inside. He never asked. But the slick grin on Cero's face when he handed it over was enough to make Aether's stomach twist. "Just a quick drop," Cero had said, flipping the small box between his fingers. The neon tattoos on his arm glowed ominously in the dim light. "In and out. No one will even know you were there." No one ever did. That's how it worked in the Bandos. The cities rich and powerful kept their distance, turning a blind eye to the underbelly they towered over. It was a perfect cover for people like Aether, those who flew under the radar. Aether pulled the goggles over his eyes, his vision blending with the feed from the quad. The Bandos came alive around him as if they were a different world altogether. Ruins of the past, abandoned machines, broken glass, twisted metal. Perfect obstacles for a pilot. But tonight wasn't about fun. The wind howled through the empty corridors as Aether guided the quad through the skeleton of the old factory, weaving between pillars of concrete and steel. The drop point was only a few kilometers away, near the edge of the district. The abandoned buildings there weren't just playgrounds, they were hideouts. And Cero's clients weren't exactly the kind you'd want to run into in the flesh. His heartbeat quickened, the adrenaline mixing with the ever-present hum of uncertainty. He knew he was on the edge of something dangerous, skating between his passion for flying and the shady business that kept his quad in the air. But the money kept coming, and for a kid like him, barely scraping by in a city built for people far richer than he could ever dream to be, he didn't have many choices. As the quad approached the coordinates, Aether steadied his breath. This wasn't a game anymore. The abandoned high-rise loomed in the distance, its hollow windows gaping like broken teeth. Aether's quad zipped toward it, the camera feed revealing every crack and shadow as it darted through the night sky. He could see the glowing graffiti marking the entrance, an abstract scrawl of neon green that only the right people would recognize. This was the spot. Aether slowed his quad, guiding it carefully into the shell of the building. His pulse quickened as he maneuvered through the shattered glass, the tight quarters testing his skills. He grinned despite himself. This was his element. No one flew the Bandos like he did. But then, in the corner of the video feed, something moved. "Shit," Aether muttered, his breath catching. The shadows shouldn't have been moving. The camera flickered, adjusting to the dim light, and then he saw it. A figure lurking just beyond the drop point. Hooded, motionless. They weren't supposed to be there. His fingers tightened on the controls, instincts screaming at him to pull back, abort the drop. Cero hadn't mentioned anyone would be there, but the hooded figure didn't flinch, didn't react to the high-pitched whine of the quad's motors. Instead, they seemed to be waiting. Aether's mind raced. Could it be a setup? A trap? He wasn't exactly on the radar of the authorities, but he wasn't invisible either. Pilots had been caught doing sketchy jobs before, and this wasn't his first questionable run for Cero. There was always a risk. For a moment, Aether considered cutting the feed, flying straight out of the Bandos and disappearing into the night. But the money? Without it, his quad would be grounded, parts too expensive to replace without these side gigs. He needed this. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the quad forward, dipping it lower toward the drop point. The package release mechanism clicked softly, the tiny box dropping neatly into place on the cracked concrete below. The figure didn't move. Come on, come on, Aether whispered under his breath. Just one clean exit. But as he pulled back on the throttle to lift off, the figure finally moved. Fast. Too fast. A flicker of motion, and suddenly a small drone shot up from the shadows, streaking toward Aether's quad like a hunter closing in on its prey. The screen flashed red, alarms blaring in his headset. His quad jolted violently, spinning out of control as the unknown drone slammed into it. Damn it! Aether shouted, frantically trying to regain control. His quad was tumbling through the air, disoriented by the attack. The factory walls became a blur of twisted metal and graffiti as it spiraled downward. Aether's heart pounded in his chest as he fought the controls, fingers moving instinctively. He needed to stabilize, get his quad out of there before it was too late. The attacker's drone was still chasing, darting through the wreckage like a predator, closing in for another strike. With a sharp yank on the throttle, Aether managed to regain a fraction of control, sending the quad shooting upward toward an open window. The escape route was narrow, almost impossibly tight, but it was his only shot. He gritted his teeth, his mind focused entirely on the feed. The quad buzzed through the window, scraping its side against the broken frame as it shot out into the night sky. The other drone didn't follow. Aether let out a long, shaky breath, adrenaline still coursing through him as the city lights came back into view. His quad was damaged, sputtering as it limped through the air toward home. Saro's gonna hear about this, Aether muttered under his breath, wiping the sweat from his forehead. Whoever that was, they weren't just waiting to pick up a package. They had been hunting him, and he had a feeling this wasn't over.